How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. And today we're going to start with a new series. So, ever since Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes has been released in theaters, I thought that I would start a series based around that franchise. So, today I'll be talking about the original novel. So, that's where it all started with Pierre Boulle and his original vision for that particular story concept. I also want to say that I'm excited to finally talk about a book on this channel. Just for those of you who don't know, I'm a literature student over at St. Thomas, and I'm always reading books for class and also in my free time as well. So this is a really good chance to also talk about something in the literary world, and I'll certainly be doing videos centered around books in the near future. Okay, so a little background on Pierre Boulle. He was born on February 20th, 1912 in Avignon, France. During the events of World War II, Boulle served as a spy, but was captured in 1943 by the Vichy French loyalists. He was later decorated for his services. He got a couple of awards. After the war, he later became an author. For one of his first works, he used his war memories to write the acclaimed best-selling novel The Bridge on the River Kwai. It was published in 1952, and Boulle earned the Prix Sainte-Beuve, which is a French literary prize for his work. So after the success of Bridge on the River Kwai, Boulle became a really successful author. He enjoyed the publication of a number of novels. What's interesting to note is that Boulle did not like any association between his books and the sci-fi genre at large. His books outside of the mainstream novels of Apes and Bridge on the River Kwai were E=mc², Conte de l'Absurde, and Garden on the Moon. They were all published between the 50s and 60s. They would sometimes contain technological, futuristic, even fantastical elements to those works. Some of those story elements were encouraged by his World War II service. So just going into the Planet of the Apes novel, that background really tells you a lot of how Boulle came to establish certain elements and circumstances that were twisted in that futuristic aesthetic. And even though he did not enjoy that sci-fi genre or have his books likened to that genre, I mean, the sci-fi genre in the 50s and 60s, there were a lot of pulp stories, so I can imagine that a lot of authors who wanted to be held in a high esteem, they didn't really want to be associated with all those ludicrous stories, so I can see the justification behind that. Okay, background on the Planet of the Apes novel. Planet of the Apes, or La Planète des Singes, was published in Paris, France in 1963. Following that, Zane Fielding published the manuscript into English for American and British publications later in 1963 for American readers and early on in 1964 for the British side. What's interesting is that the British title was different. It was called Monkey Planet, so a bit of a different connotation there. Not as an attractive title as Planet of the Apes for sure. So looking back, Boulle was not overly fond of his work on Planet of the Apes. He thought it was one of his lesser works. It was possibly due to it appearing to most affiliate with the sci-fi genre, so what I was talking about a little before. So I have a quote from Pierre Boulle on the inspiration behind his novel. Boulle said, "It is a story, and science fiction is only the pretext. I wouldn't even know how to define science fiction. I think it's the genre where you can deal with and imagine unhuman characters, but in my book, my apes are men, there is no doubt. I believe it was triggered by a visit to the zoo where I watched the gorillas. I was impressed by their human-like expressions. It led me to dwell upon and imagine relationships between humans and apes." That perception of apes having human-like expressions, I think that played a big part into how Boulle approached writing his novel, which we'll touch on here in a little bit. Okay, so before we get into the novel itself, which I do have right here, there might be a couple books that possibly might have influenced Pierre Boulle further. There were some similar themes coming up with a book called Genius Homo, written by L. Sprague de Camp and P. Schuler Miller, which was published in 1950, so a good 13 years before Monkey Planet or Planet of the Apes was published. That book mainly dealt with the evolution of gorillas, so they are the dominant species on Earth in that book. There were a group of humans that were kept in stasis for a millennium, and when they come out of that suspended animation, they arrive in a world where all that they knew has changed. The gorillas are dominant on the planet. So there's a couple concepts here that might have been transferred over to Pierre Boulle's Planet of the Apes manuscript. So the idea of evolution of the apes is there in this work, and also what makes it possible for intelligent humans to see these apes is that they are kept away from that planet for a time, and then they're brought back through the means of suspended animation in this case, or with interspace travel with Pierre Boulle, so that device there. Then there was Ape and Essence by Aldous Huxley, which was released in 1948, and that mainly dealt with the downfall of humanity and that dystopian setting. So a couple similarities there. Boulle may have passed those works by and have unconsciously or maybe even intentionally moving those ideas into his own work. So I guess we'll never know unless there's a Pierre Boulle quote out there somewhere that I haven't come across. Now let's dive into the book itself. The main characters, the human main characters in the novel who land on the ape planet, are actually comprised of French astronauts. The main character in the book is Ulysses Moreau. Hopefully I said that right. I don't know French. I've never taken French, so if I mispronounce any French names or terms, I apologize for that. I took German in high school, so that's not going to help me here at all. So anyways, Ulysses is a reporter. He's an everyman type of character who's essentially a fish out of water. This is a fish out of water story. He's the audience surrogate, or the reader surrogate, so we're experiencing events along with Ulysses. When Ulysses is found, he's taken to be observed by the apes and studied, and he must pass through a series of tests in order to prove his competence to the apes. And also what's interesting is that these astronauts are from the far future, from 2500. Boulle writes the book through Ulysses' perspective, so it's a first-person perspective that moves the story forward. In the novel, the ape planet is found within the Betelgeuse system. They call the planet that they land on, the ape planet, Sor, which is French for sister, I believe. It's called Sor for its resemblance of Earth. It resembles Earth, but it's important to note that it is a completely different planet altogether. The ape society roughly resembles that of what human society was in the mid to late 20th century. So in terms of technology, outfits, and the state of things. So how the ape society is structured is that it's class dependent on the ape species. You have the gorillas, who are laborers or workers. They also are enforcers, so like police. The orangutans are administrators. They're also politicians, which go hand in hand. And then finally you have the chimpanzees, who are the theorists or the intellectuals. They're the most kind out of the ape species as a whole. What's also important to note is that the humans on Sor in the story are very primitive. They're what apes are in our world. The novel itself is quite intellectual, with a lot of sequences within. They're filled with Ulysses trying to prove his intelligence to the apes once he lands on the planet. He's put through a series of tests, and he's eventually able to pass them all. He even learns the simian language in the book that's used by the apes who are living on the planet. It takes him a while. It's a process, but he eventually does learn. The antagonism is found in Dr. Zaius, who is most unbelieving of Ulysses' intelligence until he is proven wrong during a sequence where Ulysses gives a speech to a whole assembly of apes. The antagonism comes from a place of unbelieving of a human possessing the intelligence of the ape on Sor. It's not from some history or myth like in the original movie. My favorite part of the story is when Ulysses gives his speech to that assembly of apes. I'll go to 176 on my book for that. So the passage starts, I'll hold it up here. The passage starts right when Ulysses stops speaking. He's given this whole speech, very elegantly worded by Boulle, really good prose. So he says, "I stopped speaking, exhausted, in total silence. I turned automatically to the president's table, picked up the glass of water standing there, and drained it in a gulp. Like the act of clapping my hands together, this simple gesture produced an amazing effect and was the signal for an absolute uproar. The whole hall spontaneously gave vent to an enthusiastic outburst that no pen could ever describe. I knew I had won over my audience, but I would never have thought it possible for any assembly in the world to break into such commotion. I was deafened by it, retaining just enough composure to observe one of the reasons for this fantastic din. Apes, who are exuberant by nature, clap with all four hands when they are pleased. I was thus surrounded by a seething mass of frantic creatures balancing on their rumps and waving their four limbs in a frenzy of applause, punctuated by wild yells in which the gorilla's deep voices predominated. This was one of my last glimpses of this memorable session. I felt unsteady on my feet. I looked anxiously around me. Zaius had just risen from his seat in fury and was striding up and down the platform with his hands behind his back, as he did in front of my cage. As though in a dream, I saw the vacant chair and collapsed into it. A fresh burst of applause, which I had barely heard before fainting dead away, greeted in his gesture. Zaius' preconceptions are absolutely shattered here. He's actually embarrassed by it. He walks back and forth and just in that state of being proven absolutely wrong. And I think it even states that he's discredited for a while. In this type of book, it's a great way of the hero one-upping the antagonist here. It's not through some action sequence. It's not by physically overpowering his opponent. It's by mentally challenging and ultimately overcoming that preconception. So overall, just a great passage there. Ultimately, I think Pierre Boulle's novel is a story of biases and how the perception of others leads to consequences. This theme really pays off towards the end of the novel. So it's revealed that on Sora, with an archaeological dig, that humans had ruled over apes at one point in time. The evidence is found through the form of a China doll, a human China doll. So on page 206 here. Don't worry guys, this will be a shorter citation. I see the object lying in the sand at the same moment that he mutters in a strangled voice, "A doll! Ulysses, a doll!" It is a doll, an ordinary China doll. By a miracle, it has been preserved, almost intact, with vestiges of hair and eyes that still reveal a few chips of color. It is such a familiar sight to me that at first I cannot understand Cornelius's emotion. It takes me several seconds to realize. Then I've got it. So the existence of that doll proves that humans were quite intelligent on Sora in the past, in the far past, when previously apes had believed that they had always ruled over the race of men. So it's a very pivotal scene. That image of a doll has constantly come up in the Apes films. I know it was in the newest one, and it was very pivotal in the original movie as well. It's because that the humans grew too dependent on their ape laborers. Apes proceeded to take over and become dominant on the planet while humankind evolved. That revelation and the twist ending, which I won't spoil here, beg the question on if the downfall of humanity is justified, if humanity is the oppressor and we're morally in the wrong and there's no progress being made, should humanity still remain the dominant species on the planet? So I think that's a question that Boulle strikes here, but it's more subtle than the points he makes previously. So prosperity of a new age is ruined by past prejudices held by those in the ape society. There's a small moment where apes and men may be able to work together, but that dream ultimately comes crashing down with that revelation and those prejudices that are held in ape society. It's refused by society as a whole, ultimately. Plus the twist ending is brilliant, so the novel's wrapped up in a really neat bow. So the book, it's a great fun sci-fi novel that has the reader re-examine society by creating an alternate one on the ape planet. It's very effective in that, I think. It's a fast-paced book that is motivated by Ulysses learning about the ape planet, Sora, and discovering a life there as well. I think the reader is intrigued by each next step in Ulysses' journey of proving his capability to the ape society, and that's what made the book so invigorating for me when I read it. It was just seeing what next steps were taken by Ulysses and his ally, his Zera Cornelius. It was just so fascinating learning more about this ape society that they were running, what tests Ulysses had to endure next, more mental rather than physical. And the book does subtly ask the question on if humanity is worth saving. If we become lazy, should we continue on as the dominant species on the planet? That's a thread that the filmmakers picked up with and ran with. I do also like that the setting for the planet is more contemporary. It's a take of that ape society that's more contemporary, and I do really appreciate that. Recommend this book to anyone who enjoys the films and just who enjoys old 50s, 60s sci-fi in general, more on the intellectual side, along with Jules Verne, George Orwell, all those authors. If you liked those books, I think you'll really enjoy this. Has more of a pulp flair to it, but I do think themes and messages come across due to the strength of Pierre Boulle's writing, and his distancing himself from the sci-fi genre kind of helped him in a way where through a way that may have not been conceived of by a typical sci-fi author. So it might have helped the story in the long run. It's not as action-packed as you would think, but I do think the Ulysses' intellectual path of understanding is very compelling, and that's what makes the book. So that's it for today. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. I definitely recommend that you read the book, watch the movies. It's an incredible franchise. And the next video in this series, I'm not sure when it's going to be coming out, but I will be talking about my favorite movie of all time, which is the 1968 Planet of the Apes. And yep, that's about it I have for today. Everyone have a good rest of your day.